everybody, so with the release of the upcoming The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It, I thought it'd be a perfect time to actually do an updated version of my Conjuring Universe ranking. It's been a couple years now since I did one, so I thought it'd be great to actually do an updated one with the upcoming film coming out, of course. So be sure you share your personal rankings down below. I never would have guessed in a million years watching the very first film that so many years later we'd have all of these different spin-offs and sequels, but I will admit, overall, as a whole, I actually do enjoy the Conjuring universe. I'm a huge fan of horror, so it's cool to just see that become so popular and actually have some really great installments in it. But without further ado, let's get right into my last place pick, because we gotta talk about a lot of different movies in the Conjuring universe. For my number 8 pick, I have Annabelle. With this being the first of the spin-offs in the Conjuring universe, this was a rough one. The style and look of the Annabelle doll is scary, but other than that, there's really nothing scary about this film. It's just an overall very bland, generic horror film. Nothing about this film is memorable, from its lackluster performances, its really bland, cheap, generic jump scare elements, and just the fact that it just has really poor direction as a whole. It does the bare minimum when it comes to even trying to be a horror film. It really is just bottom of the barrel kind of stuff here. And the story itself also is not compelling whatsoever. Nothing about this film is interesting, and it did have me worried because this was like the first big misstep in the Conjuring universe. For my number 7 pick, I have The Nun. Now, for me personally, this is probably the most disappointing film in the Conjuring universe because the Valak character is such a cool character, one of the best parts easily of The Conjuring 2, so it sounds like on paper this should be an awesome idea to give her her own spin-off movie where she has the spotlight, and it's all wasted potential. You have these great environments that are full of creepy atmosphere and some mildly memorable characters in Father Burke and Sister Irene, and you waste them in this overly slow, monotonous, and cliche of a horror film. Especially on the rewatch, this film is just overfilled with the cheap jump scares where you pan away from the camera for a minute and then something pops up in the background, and it does that throughout the entire runtime, and it's just such a slog to get through because there's really just nothing of a story here. It's 96 minutes long and it feels way longer than it actually is, and the nun character herself is really not in the film all that much, which is also generally just kind of a big miss there when you have the character called the nun and it's the main character and she's barely even in the movie. As I said, it's just wasted potential here. We could have really had a fun horror film exploring the nun character a lot more in depth, but shockingly, this is actually the highest grossing film in the entire Conjuring universe because the character's so popular. So let us hope with a potential nun sequel we get a better installment like they did with the Annabelle films. With my number 6 pick, I have The Curse of Laguna. Now this one's an interesting case. It almost feels like the black sheep of the franchise because for the most part in the marketing, it really wasn't played up that this was actually within the universe of The Conjuring. For me, The Curse of Laguna just felt very average as a whole when it comes to horror films in general. There are some actual genuine kind of suspenseful moments that are well directed by Michael Chavez that are sprinkled in amongst all of the different jump scares in the film. La Llorona as a character actually is fairly creepy. The film is definitely elevated by its performances from Linda Cardellini and Raymond Cruz, who definitely make this film a bit better than the material that they're given. There's not anything particularly memorable in this film that really makes it stand out amongst all these other films, but it's also not terrible enough for me to rank it any lower in my opinion. So that's why, I mean, it's just a fairly average standard horror film, especially within the Conjuring universe. For my number 5 pick, I have Annabelle Comes Home. This film, it kind of can fall into maybe like a guilty pleasure category, just because I actually enjoy the plot, kind of the novelty aspect of actually going around the Warrens' home and just looking at all of their scary objects that they have in their possession. They're mainly confined to inside the Warrens' house for the entire runtime of the film, but I think that's what kind of makes it kind of like a fun haunted house attraction kind of film, since they have to be a little bit more crafty in the way that they build tension and scares because we are confined to one singular house. The cast as well is a bit more memorable and more fun this time around. We do get a little bit of Ed and Lorraine Warren in this, but they kind of just bookend the film. But I really do like the addition of McKenna Grace playing Judy Warren, and also the other fun teenage characters as well, like Bob's Got Balls. There's just a fun energy to watching this film if you don't take it too seriously, especially since it is very obvious that they're using this film to also make a bunch of different other characters to spin off into other films, like the Ferryman or the Bride, who I thought when we did watch this it was going to be the La Llorona character, but it's not. It's a completely different character. La Llorona and the Bride are different. But yeah, very inconsequential installment in the Conjuring universe, but I had some fun with it. With my number 4 pick, I have The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It. Now, I'm not going to touch upon this film too much in depth here because I do have a whole review about it, so if you want to know my full thoughts about the film, check that out. But I think this was definitely an interesting, unique take to take the direction of the franchise in. Definitely very different than the first 2 Conjuring films that James Wan directed, but I kind of like that about this installment. We move away from the haunted house format from the other 2 Conjuring films and we have a more investigative storyline, but I was actually compelled a bit by the mystery, and I also just love the fun scares of this film as well. I think Michael Chavez has improved his directing since The Curse of La Llorona. It's developed some really fun, suspenseful moments within this film that I think everybody's going to like. I may have had this a little bit higher if the story itself wasn't as bloated as it is, and it is a little bit super over the top compared to other installments. We are 8 films into this universe Universe at this point, but I mean, we're definitely gone from the grounded reality we got in the first two films from James Wan. For my number 3 pick, I have Annabelle Creation. I was not excited for this at all when they were going to make a sequel to Annabelle, but to my surprise, David F. Sandberg pulled it off and made a really great horror film. Everything this time around is just so much more interesting. The story itself, the mystery inside of the house, as all of that mystery is bubbling underneath the surface and creating tension. Then you couple that with some really phenomenal scares in this very creepy setting. David F. Sandberg just has a really great awareness when it comes to placing these tense moments instead of relying overly on the jump scare elements. All around, this is just a really great horror film. David F. Sandberg has become one of my favorite horror directors between this and Lights Out, and also just other stuff in general because he's doing the Shazam movie, so he's very versatile. A lot of these horror directors have done a lot of superhero stuff as well, including James Wan, because of course he did Aquaman. With my number 2 pick, I have The Conjuring 2. This was a great way to do a sequel, expanding more, giving you more of what you want as we delve into the Warrens and go deeper into them as people as they solve another case. Just like in the very first Conjuring film, the scare aspect is great. James Wan, as usual, is the master of horror and he knows how to craft tension so well. Even the storylines outside of this case, I love that we develop Ed and Lorraine Warren a bit more as the relationship is going through these different trials and tribulations, like the character Valak. Valak is such an interesting character. It wasn't originally supposed to even be in this film, but yet ends up being one of the most memorable things about this film and having some of the best scares. The only real reasons I can think of why it's not higher and not at number 1 is because I do think the story does go a little bit overboard. It does feel a little bit more bloated than it should. We have too many things juggling around. The film is 2 hours and 15 minutes long, and I really think that we could have easily shaved this down. It would have been a much better film, but that's not to say the film isn't great in its own way, because I still think it's a phenomenal horror sequel and just a great horror film in general. With my number 1 pick, I have The Conjuring. Not a very shocking pick, I know, but frankly, I think this is probably one of the best modern horror films of this era. James Wan is just so great at crafting a rich world to build upon, filled with interesting characters, even as he's trying to scare you half to death in this film. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are excellent as Ed and Lorraine Warren. Their chemistry is just through the roof, and they're very likable characters, so it's very easy to want to follow them along on these crazy supernatural cases. And as I usually say about James Wan, I think he's a master of horror, and this has some very iconic scares in it. The tension of all of the scares are built perfectly, really keeping you on the edge of your seat and just very unsettled throughout the entire film's runtime. Even as someone who's seen the film dozens of times, there are some scenes that are genuinely just very scary no matter if you know they're coming or not. It's just a great horror film all around. Like I said, it's one of my favorites probably to watch of the modern era. I think it's just an iconic film. It kind of set a precedent and a bar for what makes a really good horror film in this supernatural genre to this day. But there you have it. That is my now updated ranking of all the different films in the Conjuring universe, ranked from worst to best in my personal opinion. This has been a lot of fun, so I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Like I already said, make sure you share your rankings down below, how you would rank all the different films in the Conjuring universe from worst to best. I'm sure you guys are all going to have different lists than I am, and that's what makes this kind of fun, having that discussion about different films and all that stuff, because I like having those discussions with you guys, especially with horror films, because horror is probably my favorite genre. Thank you guys, as always, check out my videos, though I really do appreciate it. Make sure to leave a like, hit the subscribe button. We'll keep reviews, reactions, unboxings, and more on the channel. But next time, I'll see you guys later.